What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to talk about how I feel Call of Duty is killing its community, especially in recent years. Now, I've been very heavily invested in this community for over a decade at this point. It's a huge part of my livelihood, and I'm fully aware that there is a certain cycle with the COD community, and right now we are kind of at the low point, where obviously the community's not going to be as interactive or hyped up right now as it was when the game launched. Having said that though, I'm quite used to this cycle, and it really seems to be changing. It really seems to be different in recent years, especially in the past couple years. And this is why I feel that Call of Duty really has been killing its core community. Now, just to get a few things out of the way first, when I refer to community here, I am talking about the core community, or the people that engage with the game outside of the game itself. The people that are on Twitter or Reddit or YouTube, watching YouTube videos and commenting, interacting with things relating to the game. And I'm not talking about the average player that just like hops on for a couple games after work and that's the end of it. Like, they never really talk about Call of Duty beyond that. And I realize that's likely the vast majority of the player base. So at the end of the day, as much as you see comments like dead game and stuff like that, I'm sure even the current player base of Modern Warfare 2 is a player base that most developers out there would absolutely kill for. I'm not in any way claiming like the game itself is dead or the franchise is ruined or anything. I'm just talking about that core community, and it really seems like this community has been dying in recent years. Now, additionally, the majority of this is going to be focused on multiplayer, although Warzone also appears to be having its own big issues with community, where even currently it seems to be less popular than the end of the life cycle of Warzone 1. And I also want to mention that I'm going to be focusing on things outside of gameplay design. I realize gameplay design does play a big role in this as well. Like, if people don't like the gameplay, they're not going to stick around to be part of the community, most likely. Since those areas are so subjective, and I cover them a lot in my other videos, I mainly just want to be honing in on the things that directly impact the community that don't involve gameplay. And with all of that out of the way, let's hop into the first element that I wanted to talk about here that I feel is killing the Call of Duty community. This is massive fragmentation. Especially in recent years, Call of Duty has been trying to hit every area of FPS subgenres. And I get it, they want to have as much widespread appeal as possible. That's really what Call of Duty's always been about, is reaching as many people as possible. But I do feel this has had huge negative impacts on the community itself, because it's splitting the community in so many different directions. In the past, we basically had like campaign, multiplayer, and zombies or spec ops. And when it comes to campaign, that's more of like a one-off thing. There's not much of a community that's surrounding campaign. So community-wise, we basically had the zombies community and the multiplayer community. Whereas now, just in Modern Warfare 2, we've got the multiplayer community, we've got the Warzone community, we've got the DMZ community, we've got the Raid community, we've got the Spec Ops community. It's split up in so many different ways, and these modes are often not very compatible with each other, and yet they want to keep all the mechanics as similar as possible between them all, so it has the same feel. And I feel like this pulls the game and the community in so many different directions, where they might make a decision for one mode that's really positive for that one mode, but then it has a negative impact on another mode. Or maybe there's one mode that would benefit massively from a particular change, but they can't really make that change because it would harm the other modes too much. And I feel like all of this just really comes at the cost of the depth and quality of each individual mode. And as much as I think it's neat to provide options for gamers to approach the game in many different ways and to provide more experiences for people in the game, I don't think that should come at the cost of depth and quality when it comes to the main core modes. I really miss the days where their big updates would just be multiplayer and zombies, and they were generally pretty well separated, where they didn't really impact each other at all, or at least not to a large degree. So when you did get a big update as somebody in the community, it was generally great because the mode that you were interested in was less likely to just be a footnote in the patch notes. Whereas now, with things so split up, we're like lucky to get a few positive changes in the right direction, even with major seasonal updates. Now, in a perfect world for me, they would completely separate multiplayer from Warzone as much as possible to really allow for proper attention to be given to both of those modes without having to impact each other as well, at least not too severely. Obviously, there'd have to be some connection between these two. And I don't think there's ever really a perfect solution to this from the business perspective as well, because obviously they want to keep them as connected as possible because of microtransactions, and they also want to make sure people are buying the mainline COD every year, even if they're just playing primarily Warzone, for instance. But ideally, community-wise, those would be separated a whole lot more so they can get the proper attention they deserve. And then on top of that, when it comes to the additional side modes or more experimental modes like raids or DMZ for instance, those should be the types of things that come after you get the core game really nailed down and in a solid place. Again, in a perfect world, those should be bonuses on top of an already great polished experience. But unfortunately, with Call of Duty's annual cycle, as well as just the way their structure works with monetization and everything, I honestly don't know what the solution to this would be. I feel like they've kind of backed themselves into a corner here, which is inherently just splitting up the community. And as a result, that's having a very big negative impact on the community as well. So that's the first big area that I feel has been harming community quite a bit in recent years with Call of Duty. Now let's get into the second one, and this is really disjointed gaming sessions with limited player control. And yes, this is going to be talking a lot about disbanding lobbies. And I know I've ragged on disbanding lobbies and matchmaking so much in the past several years, but that's because I feel like these are so important to maintaining a healthy community long term. And I think these were really successful early on, and they probably pumped up their metrics immensely. But I think the burnout with this is really starting to show. And I honestly feel this is one of the worst decisions they've made with this franchise when it comes to community and fostering a healthy community. Now, before disbanding lobbies, we used to be able to form rivalries and friendships and have rematches and adapt to players across multiple games. And it used to feel like we were playing against actual people. Like you get into a lobby and there's people in that lobby. There's like a little sense of a mini community in that lobby itself, and you can stick with them for hours on end potentially. Whereas now, when you get into a game, you just feel like you're playing against random accounts you'll never see again. Like, you don't really care who's in your lobby. You don't care about any of that because they're not going to be there in the next game you play. There's no stakes involved either. Additionally, when we had those persistent lobbies in the past, I feel like each gaming session would have more of a story to it. Where maybe you get into a lobby, you get kind of beat up by a team and you lose pretty bad. But you're a determined person and you want to adapt your playstyle to them, and you make some adjustments to some class setups in between games. You vote for a map that you might really like. And then the next game, maybe you get a little bit closer, but you still lose out. So you keep doing it again. You keep refining what you're doing in order to counteract what these players are doing to you. Maybe you swap up your kill streaks a little bit. And then the next game, you finally manage to beat them out and you come out on top, and maybe you cause them to leave the lobby. That's kind of a story across multiple games that you get with that gaming session. You can see that progression just in that one single lobby as well. Whereas now, with disbanding lobbies, all of that's gone. You play a game, you might play great, you might play bad, you never really know. The game's over, you get reshuffled, you're now in a new lobby, and you do it all over again. There's no story involved with that. There's no adapting to other players or learning how they're playing or anything. And I feel like this is one of the biggest areas that has been killing the Call of Duty community in recent years. And it's the reason that I have been bringing it up so much. And that's not even mentioning the general consistency issue here with these disbanding lobbies. Not only with your connection experience, because since you're getting placed in a new lobby after every game, your connection experience can also swing wildly from game to game. Whereas previously, if you stuck in the same lobby, you would tend to have at least roughly the same experience connection-wise on a game-to-game basis. Also, map voting. It's a lot more difficult to have a map voting system, although still technically possible. It's a lot more difficult, at least, to have map voting when you have disbanding lobbies. And another small thing that I kind of miss is the consistent amount of time between matches if you stuck in the same lobby. Back in the day, once you finish your game and you end up back in the lobby, you had something like a minute or 45 seconds to make some changes to your class setups, or go to the bathroom if you needed a quick bathroom break or something like that. Or in some COD games in the past, you could check out some of the stats of the other players in the lobby, like you could look at their combat records, or at the very least their calling cards, or their showcase operator and weapon, for instance. Whereas now all of that is gone, and it's like you end a game and then bam, it just puts you back into a search, and then you're into another game. You won't be able to check out any of the players that you just played against. You might not have time to even make adjustments to class setups before you get into the next match, unless you manually back out and do that and then search again. And everything with this just seems so disjointed. Now with this, I get the quick play system plays a role in this, but I do think it's still more so their engagement optimized matchmaking system, which we're going to get into more toward the end of the video. But basically this allows them to control your highs and your lows and your dopamine release at the appropriate times to keep you playing as long as possible, as long as you aren't aware of this system manipulating things. But perhaps they could go for a compromise in this area, kind of like XDefiant is planning on doing. With XDefiant, they're going to have a quick play filter, and if you have multiple modes selected, after every game it will disband and search again. However, if you decide to choose a single mode, you will always stay in that lobby after the game ends, along with anybody else that also just has a single mode selected. I think this is a great compromise to the situation, and perhaps even provide an option for a rematch for those players that do have multiple modes selected. So if they want to stick around for a rematch, playing the same mode twice in a row in the same lobby twice in a row, then they have the ability to do that. Or if they want, they can just hit the search again button and they'll pull themselves out of the lobby. The main idea behind this is providing that control to the player. If they want to leave, let them leave. If they want to stay, let them stay. As it is right now in Call of Duty, that option just doesn't exist. As for the next issue that I feel has been harming the community in recent years, to a lesser degree than some of the previous ones, this is the shift from look what I earned to look what I bought, or basically player progression and accolades have kind of become meaningless because the microtransactions have taken over so much in so many areas. Now, to be clear, of course, microtransactions aren't going anywhere in Call of Duty. I would never expect that to be the case. They make so much money on it. Of course, it's here to stay. Having said that, though, I do feel like certain cosmetic elements should be reserved to be 100% earnable only. And I think the best place for this would be calling cards and/or emblems. And the main reason behind this is I don't think many people are buying bundles because of the calling card or because of the emblem you get in the bundle. The vast majority of microtransaction bundles are either bought for the weapon blueprint or operator skins, and things like calling cards and emblems tend to just be sort of filler content to make it look like you're getting more. But in doing that, I feel like it completely destroys the value that calling cards and emblems used to have in older Call of Duty games. And this is something that ties into community quite a bit. When I think back to the older Call of Duty games, especially the original Modern Warfare 2, that one stands out to me the most. When you saw somebody with a cool looking calling card, you knew that they had to do something to earn that. And oftentimes you'd be like, hey, I want to rock that calling card. I want that. How do I get that? You'd either ask the person in the lobby or you'd go online, you'd search up what the challenge is to get that particular calling card, and then you'd go into the game with that goal of getting that calling card until you saw another cool calling card you saw. And they were kind of like collectibles that you would have on your account, and to me at least, they had value back then because every single one of them needed to be earned. You couldn't just buy ones that you wanted. And the cool part about many of these is they also improved a lot of the gameplay variety because it would get you out trying new things and kind of getting outside of your comfort zone to complete challenges to earn these calling cards. And while yes, there are still tons of earnable calling cards in the game, in Modern Warfare 2 for instance, and they have recently revamped the calling card menu so it's a lot easier to navigate, at the end of the day, the coolest looking calling cards still tend to be the ones you get in bundles. And the main point here is nobody really seems to care about other people's calling cards. They're not looking at people's calling cards and being like, oh, hey, how did you get that calling card? Because the assumption most of the time when it's a cool looking calling card is, oh, they probably just bought it and got it in a bundle. If they were to keep at least one of these sections to be completely earnable and also prominently displayed, this is why I think calling cards are the best option here, I think that would contribute to community to some degree. You'd get people talking a little bit more. You'd get people striving to complete interesting challenges to get these cool looking things, and that would help a lot with longevity of the game as well. Obviously, you can still sell the operator skins and weapon blueprints and whatever other cosmetics, tracer packs, whatever you guys want, but I do feel like it's important to have at least one area that's reserved to be earnable only. Another thing I've noticed in Modern Warfare 2 especially is they don't even show calling cards all that much. You get to see the calling card when an enemy kills you, but outside of that, you never really see other players' calling cards. Whereas back in the day, it was every time you killed an enemy, you'd see their calling card. Every time that enemy got a 5 kill streak, for instance, their calling card would pop up in the top right of the screen rather than just their name with the 5 kill streak banner there. Also, going back to persistent lobbies, when you scroll through players in a lobby and you want to check out who you just played against or who you're about to play against, you would see their calling card, and it was sort of like a badge that showed off like, hey, look, I completed this cool challenge. Whereas now, that entire portion of the game I feel like is just gone, and calling cards are just meaningless things that no one cares about anymore. Now, on top of this, another thing that I feel contributes to community, at least to a small degree, again, I'm not saying this is one of the big things, but it's a small thing, and the little things add up. This is having like a quick post-match showcase screen that shows some interesting stats from the match you just played, like who got the most headshots, or the most objective score, or the highest streak in the game, for instance. Now, to be clear, I know a lot of you guys are probably cringing right now, like, no, we don't need those MVP screens back from Vanguard. And I agree, we don't need anything that's overly obstructive and takes too long in order to get you back in the lobby. But having just a quick screen that shows that, or at the very least, put it in the after action report so you can just not look at it and skip it if you want anyway when you get back into the lobby. Little things like that, I feel, contribute to community as well, because you're actually looking out for like, oh, hey, did I get the most headshots that game? I feel like I got a lot. Or like, I wonder how high of a streak that guy went on. I noticed he was streaking up a lot throughout that game. I wonder if he did get like a 30 kill streak or what he got there. It's nice to be able to check out those little accolades. And again, it makes things a little bit more human. You actually see other players and care about other players, at least to some degree. Maybe not everybody, but at least for the people that would care about that, that option is there. Now, let's move on to the next section that I feel has been harming the community in recent years. This is the general impression recently that a lot of the community has been feeling that there's just very little passion put into the games anymore, and also just a general sense of feeling neglected as a community. Now, I'm sure there's tons of really talented and passionate developers working on Call of Duty that just want what's best for the game and what's best for the community. I totally get that, but from the perspective of the community, we don't really get to see that anymore. And this does vary based on the studio to some degree, and I'm sorry, Infinity Ward, I'm going to pick on you a little bit, because I think Infinity Ward is the worst offender here. I just feel like we get the absolute bare minimum level of communication, basically just like, here's a playlist update, here's a patch notes, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing really beyond that. And while I kind of get why they did this, people were terrible to the developers, and there were a lot of personal attacks and death threats. The Call of Duty community can be horrible. I want to be clear, I don't condone that at all. If you have frustration with the game, direct it toward the game or maybe the studio as a whole, but not individual developers, and also try to be at least somewhat constructive about it. But regardless of that, I feel like the bad apples in the community that do that shouldn't mean that essentially all important communication is cut off from the rest of the community. And I feel like there are better ways of handling this, primarily using official channels for this communication rather than personal accounts. That way, when that toxicity comes, which it will, there's no avoiding it, it's at least going to be directed more at the entity rather than the individual. But as far as what I think would be nice to see here, is just addressing the most common complaints and pieces of feedback that are in the community. I'm not necessarily saying you need to change everything based on the whims of the community at any given moment. You don't have to make changes based on every piece of feedback that comes out. But when there's widespread or nearly unanimous agreement when it comes to a particular area of the game or a particular issue or piece of feedback, I feel like at the bare minimum, this should trigger some kind of communication from the developers. I'd love to see them explain some design decisions, or maybe implement some compromises, maybe find a halfway point to give the community something without completely sacrificing on the original vision that the developers wanted. At the end of the day, if you want to foster a healthy community long term, there does have to be some give and take with that community. And lately, it just feels like they do whatever they want, and maybe they'll get to some issues, maybe they won't. They often aren't really communicating what they're planning on working on, what they're planning on fixing. I know they have a Trello board, which they do update sometimes, but it would be great with a lot of those things. When they add something important to that Trello board, give us a tweet about it or a little blog post if it's something really important. I feel like things like that can go a really long way, and I feel like the community would be a lot more patient if we at least knew that they're aware of certain issues and that they're actively working on it, and that a fix or a compromise is coming in the future. I do know Call of Duty is a big game, there's a lot of moving parts, and this is probably way easier said than done, but at the end of the day, I don't feel like they're doing enough here to maintain a healthy relationship between the developers and the community, and I do feel like that's important. And with that, it is time to move on to the matchmaking section of this, because I do feel like this plays a big role. In recent years of Call of Duty, I really feel like getting good doesn't feel good, and that's completely backwards in my mind. Back in the older days of Call of Duty, when the community was thriving, I feel like the primary motivation, at least for many players out there, was to get better at the game. I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I first started playing Call of Duty back in COD 4, at least COD multiplayer, when I saw that player that was consistently on top of the lobby, I wanted to learn from that player. I wanted to become that player. And I would put the time and effort in and actively work on trying to improve. I'd be looking up YouTube videos or tips or strategies to try to get to that point so I could be that person. And with that old matchmaking system, your investment into improving had a tendency to correlate quite well with your results in game over time. You could actually track that progress over the long term as you'd get more streaks and higher placements on the scoreboard on a more consistent basis. And the best part about it is it was very attainable for anybody that just really set their mind to it. Now, with the current matchmaking system, I feel like it requires a lot more investment to break away from the pack and start seeing improved performance on a consistent basis. Now, that's not to say that you can't get better at the game. Of course, if you focus on it and you really work on it, you can get better at the game. And it's also not impossible to really break away from the pack to the point where you can consistently lead lobbies. What I find though is it's just a lot less attainable for the typical player out there that's within the realm of average or maybe a little bit above average even. I feel like for a lot of those players, they kind of get trapped in the matchmaking. And the moment a player like that has a really good game or two, now that engagement optimized matchmaking system combined with disbanding lobbies decides it's their turn to play with the big boys, and they get smacked back down to the average lobbies. And I've been noticing more and more people are starting to recognize this pattern, and in doing so, they start to dread their next game after performing really well. And that's completely backwards in my opinion. If you perform well, you should be feeling good about yourself. You should be thinking like, man, I'm getting better at this. I want to keep playing. I want to keep going. Whereas as it is now, people are starting to realize like, oh crap, I played way too good that last match. I'm in for a beating in the next one. And this obviously kills the motivation to grind and to improve and to care about the game long term. And if you can't get people to care about the game long term, you're not going to have a healthy community surrounding that game. Now, even though I really heavily criticize the current matchmaking system, I'm not one of the hardline I want 0 SBMM in regular public matches players, because I do feel like it's important to bring new players in as well, and I think a certain amount of protection for brand new players or people that are like way below average, I think a certain amount of protection is fine in order to hook those players and get them to the point where they feel comfortable, so then they can get to the point where they can start progressing from there. So I'm not advocating for 0 SBMM whatsoever. I just think the current state of it, especially when combined with disbanding lobbies and how quickly things can swing on a game-to-game basis, that is a really big issue that's been killing the Call of Duty community in the past few years, especially as more and more people are starting to see how much their gaming experience is being manipulated on a game-to-game basis. And that's not even mentioning the ability to play with mixed skilled friends. Like if a high skilled player wants to play with a lower skilled player, back in the day, they could do that and both players could find some enjoyment there because most lobbies were pretty mixed. It would consist of primarily average players with maybe a couple above average and a couple below average players mixed in, so there was a little bit of something for everyone in those lobbies. Whereas now, with this system being much more strict, if a lower skilled player joins up with a higher skilled player, they're likely to have a horrible experience where they can't get any kills at all because they're punching way above their weight. And now also for that higher skill player, it's not fun for them as well because now they have this big anchor on their team that doesn't belong at their skill level, and therefore they have to try extra hard in order to make up for that. So that has really harmed certain portions of the community as well. They can no longer play with some of the friends that they used to play with while everybody still has an enjoyable experience. And then finally, when it comes to matchmaking, I have found evidence in the past few years that your connection experience can become less consistent if you become a very good player. If you become an outlier, there are fewer appropriate skill match lobbies for you to connect to at any given time, and it appears that this matchmaking system is willing to sacrifice your connection experience to some degree in order to get you into a better skill match lobby. So again, especially with the disbanding lobbies, so there's less consistency from game to game too, the fact that ping isn't necessarily king anymore means getting good doesn't feel good. Now, one final thing I wanted to mention here that has been contributing to killing the community lately is the fact that Call of Duty has been killing off a lot of the fan-made mods for older Call of Duty games. Now, I feel this is far less relevant than a lot of the things I've been mentioning throughout this video, simply because pretty small portions of the community ever played these mods or even knew that they existed. But it is a very relevant topic at the moment since this just recently happened, and while Call of Duty has every legal right to do this, it has been hurting their image quite a bit within the community, and a lot of people are hating them for this. So that obviously isn't helping their case of the community right now either. And with that, that is going to cover it for the main topics that I wanted to talk about in today's video. I do feel like all of these points have been really harming the community in recent years, and I think we're seeing a lot of burnout, and like I said, this doesn't feel like the typical COD cycle burnout for a year. It really seems like Call of Duty is slowly killing its core community. Now, of course, these are all just my opinions as well, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this topic in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.